Black duck cannot be underestimated. My name is Monica Hayes, and by most standards, I have a pretty good life. I live with my husband David in a quaint suburb just outside of Chicago. He's a good man, steady, dependable, hardworking. We've been married for 8 years, and although we don't have children, we lead a peaceful, comfortable life. And yet here I am, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, wondering how I became someone I barely recognize. It all started so naturally, like a whisper in my head. At first I didn't actively pursue it, I didn't even understand it, but somehow curiosity grew. David and I had long since fallen into a routine. He got up at 6 a.m. every morning, had the same eggs and toast for breakfast, and then went to work at the accounting firm. He didn't say much when he got home, not because he was unfriendly, but because he was exhausted. He sat on the recliner, watched the evening news, and fell asleep at 9 p.m. For years, I told myself that was enough. What I wanted was stability, a love that was repressed, but still love. At least that's what I thought. One day, while mindlessly browsing social media, I stumbled upon a blog post. It was nothing special, just an article about how long-term partners can rekindle the passion. But one sentence stuck with me. Sometimes, curiosity about something you've never experienced can make your mind wander. It couldn't hurt, right? Everyone gets curious about certain things. But the thought wouldn't go away. I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. The construction workers on the street, with their hearty laughter and broad shoulders. The barista at the coffee shop, who always seemed so confident. And the men at the gym, with their tan skin gleaming in the sweat, their laughter echoing through the otherwise dead space. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown woman, daydreaming like a schoolgirl. But I couldn't get the thought out of my head. What would it be like? Not just their appearance, but the vitality they exuded and the way they moved through the world with an unspoken confidence that captivated everyone. I told myself it was just harmless infatuation. Everyone has their type, right? But it wasn't about a type. It was because they were so different from David, so different from everything I knew. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. A month ago, I had joined a gym in the hope of doing something other than cleaning and cooking. David thought it was a good idea. Good for your health, he said. That day, I noticed them while I was on the treadmill, 2 men standing near the weightlifting equipment. They were laughing about something, their deep, resonant voices filling the room. One of them, Marcus, had a smile that was so bright it lit up the room. His skin was dark and deep, and his shoulders seemed to stretch into the distance. The other one was named Jamal, taller and thinner, with prominent cheekbones and a piercing gaze that made my heart race. I tried not to look directly at him, but my eyes betrayed me. To my surprise, Marcus caught my gaze and smiled, saying, "You're doing great." He nodded towards the treadmill. I smiled nervously, not knowing how to respond. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Well, seems to me you're doing great." I felt my face blush. It was just small talk, but their attention made me feel like I was basking in the sun after a long, cold winter. For weeks, I'd been looking forward to these encounters. They were friendly, that was all. Marcus would ask me about my workout, and Jamal would crack a joke or two. It was simple, wasn't it? But deep down, I knew. I knew that the way I hung around them and the way my heart raced when they smiled at me wasn't simple. Point one day, as I was leaving the gym, Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. "Hey, Monica," he said in a soft, warm voice. I froze. "You remember my name?" he said with a smile. "Of course I do. I never forget a pretty face." The words hung in the air, charged with danger. I laughed to try to push it away, but my heart was pounding. "Maybe we could get a cup of coffee sometime," he said, staring into my eyes. I should have said no. I should have laughed and walked away. Instead, I heard myself say, "Sure, why not?" As I drove home, a feeling of guilt began to spread. David didn't deserve to be treated like this. He had never hurt me, never given me a reason to cheat. But the sense of curiosity and being noticed was intoxicating. That evening, David sat in his deck chair, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I realized I had opened a door that I might never be able to close. The next day, I agreed to meet Marcus for coffee, waking up feeling guilty. I told myself not to go. What was I thinking? It was one thing to enjoy the attention, but meeting him outside the gym was something else entirely. But as the hours passed, my resolve weakened. I stared at my phone, reading Marcus's text over and over again. "Meet you at 2 in the parking lot of the same gym." When 2 o'clock came, I found myself sitting in my car, driving to the gym. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my ears. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Marcus leaning against his car, a sleek black sedan that complemented his elegant demeanor. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt the air leave my lungs. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, opening the passenger door for me. I hesitated for a moment, but then I sat down in the seat. The car smelled of leather and cologne, a mixture that made my head spin. "Relax," he whispered, his voice soothing. "It's just coffee." But it wasn't, and we both knew it. The coffee shop was small and located in the part of town I didn't frequent very often. Marcus held the door open for me, and as we walked in together, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and shame. We sat in a quiet corner, and for the first time, I noticed how intensely Marcus was staring at me. His gaze was firm, as if he were looking straight into my soul. "So, Monica," he said, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about yourself." I smiled nervously. "There's nothing to tell. I'm just a boring housewife." "Boring?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe you." I shrugged, trying to downplay the effect his attention was having on me. "Well, what about you? What do you do when you're not at the gym?" "I work at a real estate company," he said, smiling as his mouth curled up. "When I have time, I play basketball. Keeps me out of trouble." I found myself smiling, and the tension between us eased slightly. We talked for an hour, maybe 2. I told him things I'd never told anyone, not even David. I told him how lonely I sometimes felt, how my life had become a series of meaningless routines. He listened intently, in a way I wasn't used to. When it was time to go, Marcus walked me to my car. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice softer now. "I really enjoyed the date." "Me too," I admit, and the words come out before I can stop them. He comes closer, and for a moment I think he's going to kiss me. I hold my breath, my heart racing, but he just smiles and takes a step back. Have a safe trip home, Monica. Driving home, my thoughts race. I've crossed the line, but I can't bring myself to regret it and the days that followed. I was filled with guilt and anticipation. I buried myself in my daily routine, trying to act normal in David's presence, but Marcus's shadow kept popping up in my mind. A few days later, I saw him at the gym and everything seemed unchanged. He greeted me with a smile, but there was a little more heat in his gaze. Jamal seemed to sense something too. You guys have been chatting a lot lately, he said teasingly. Jealous? Marcus grinned and asked in return. Jamal shook his head and laughed. Maybe. Then he turned to me. Monica, Marcus is not the only interesting person. I felt my face redden and smiled awkwardly. I'll bear that in mind. The joke was light-hearted, but it made me feel even more conflicted. Part of me wanted to end it while I was ahead, but another part, the part that had been dormant for so long, wanted to see where things would lead. A week later, Marcus invited me to his place. It's just a small gathering, he said. Some friends' food, nothing crazy. I told myself I was only agreeing out of politeness, but I knew it better when I stood in front of the mirror that night, carefully selecting a casual but flattering outfit. His apartment was in the city, a sleek and modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. There were only a few people there, most of them chatting and laughing in the living room. Marcus embraced me, and his hands lingered on my back for a moment that felt much too long. You look amazing, he said, and I replied, thank you. I tried to act casual. Jamal arrived shortly after, and his presence energized the room. He smiled and greeted me, and I noticed his gaze linger on me for a long time. The evening passed in a whirl of laughter, music, and stolen glances. I felt like a different person, like the one I had forgotten. But as the night drew to a close, I realized what I was doing. Marcus offered to walk me to my car, and I found myself alone with him again. You're full of surprises, Monica, he said, staring into my eyes. What do you mean? I asked, quietly. He came closer, and his hand touched mine. I mean, you're not as boring as you think you are. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. At first it was gentle and tentative, but it soon deepened and I felt myself surrender to it. When we parted, I was breathless. I should go, I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression inscrutable. Good night, Monica. As I drove home, tears streamed down my face. I had crossed a line from which there was no return. For the next few weeks, there was an endless tug-of-war going on inside me. I knew what I had done and that there was no going back. The kiss with Marcus had unsettled me more than I could have ever imagined. I tried to ignore it as a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it was more than just a kiss. It was the beginning of everything, and every glance, every touch, every smile drew me deeper and deeper into it. David never noticed, or maybe he just didn't want to. He continued with his daily routine, following the rules. He was a good husband who loved his family, coming home at 6 o'clock, eating dinner, sitting in his chair, listening to the hum of the TV and falling asleep. He didn't see how I began to distance myself from him, becoming distracted. He didn't know that my heart no longer belonged to the calm, predictable life we had built together. That was what made me suffer. I loved David. I always have. But every time I met Marcus and Jamal, I felt like I was falling apart. It didn't take long for things to escalate. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, couldn't stop the constant pull of desire. And it seemed like every time I saw him, I was consumed. The gym, once a place of pure exercise, became a battlefield. My body yearning to be near him, to feel his touch again. One afternoon, as I finished my workout, I noticed him standing next to the weight machines, watching me with a focus that made my heart race. "Hey," he said, stepping closer. "I missed you last week." I tried to ignore the blush rising in my cheeks and swallowed. "I've been busy lately," I said with a forced smile. He wasn't buying it. Busy? Or avoiding me? I didn't dare look him in the eye and didn't know how to answer. My heart was pounding. "I'm not avoiding you," I finally said, barely audible. He smiled slightly, his body moving closer, his breath warm against my skin. "I don't think so." And so we were back to square one, caught up in this dangerous and intoxicating dance. That afternoon, he invited me to meet him again, just the two of us. The moment I agreed, I knew I was treading on uncharted territory, but the temptation was too strong to resist. When I arrived at his apartment, I was both excited and scared. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. Marcus opened the door with a smile, but there was a darkness in his eyes, an air of unspoken promise that filled the room between us. He led me inside, into a quiet, intimate room. No music, no distractions, just us. "I think about you a lot," he whispers, his voice raspy. I try to keep my last shreds of sanity together, reminding myself that I can't make this mistake. But the way he looks at me, the way he fills the room with his presence, it's impossible to stay level-headed. Before I know it, his lips are on mine again. This time, he doesn't test the waters. This time, it's desperate and urgent, as if he can feel the uncontrollable fire inside me. I can hear my heart beating as I kiss him back, and the world outside this moment disappears. I felt more alive than I had in years. Guilt and fear, they all faded into the background. There was only Marcus and my burning desire for him. The kiss became deeper and deeper, and I felt his hand on my waist, pulling me closer. His touch excited me, and it was completely different from David's. He knew exactly where to touch me and how to make me feel like the only woman in the world. I couldn't control myself, and I didn't want to doubt I was in a daze for the next few days. Marcus and I were no longer just acquaintances from the gym. We met more and more often, and the encounters became more and more intense. We found places to meet, quiet corners in the park, hidden corners in cafes. Every time we met, I felt like I was giving up a little bit more of myself. The guilt weighed on me, but the excitement was too strong to resist. Then Jamal appeared. I didn't expect him to get involved so quickly, but one day he caught me chatting with Marcus after a workout. The chemistry between us was obvious, and I could feel Jamal's gaze on us. "I feel like I'm missing out," Jamal said teasingly. "You two always seem so happy." I froze. Did he see something? My heart raced, But Marcus just laughed and casually put his arm around my shoulder. "You're welcome to join us anytime," he said. I regretted those words as soon as they were out, and I felt a strong wave of panic. But Jamal just gave a cold smile. "Maybe I will." From that moment on, things changed. Jamal started joining us more often. He showed up at the gym, always where Marcus and I were, and slowly, without warning, he became part of our dynamic. We hung out for the first time, and it was no big deal, drinking at the bar, laughing, chatting casually, but I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken, unbreakable understanding that our relationship was something more than friendship. I knew I was walking a dangerous line point one night. After an especially intense gym session, Marcus sent me a text, "Come over to my place." I hesitated, but my desire overrode any rational thinking. I drove to his apartment, thinking about what I was about to do. I told myself that this would be the last time, that I would finally end this madness. But when I walked in, the door closed behind me, and there was no turning back. Marcus was already there, but Jamal was too. I realized I had crossed a line, and it was all I could never have imagined. I stood on the edge of a precipice, looking down into the abyss I had created. They were both there, two men who knew how to make me feel seen and desired, something David had never managed to do. "Relax, Monica," Marcus whispered, his voice calm. "Tonight is all about you. Just relax." I did that night. I stepped into an abyss from which there was no return. After that night, it was as if I were carrying a heavy burden, suffocating under the weight of guilt. I could not erase the guilt from my heart, and no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the truth would always be there, haunting me. David knew nothing about it. He never suspected a thing. I continued to play the role of the dutiful wife, greeting him when he came home, cooking dinner for him, listening to his boring jokes. But deep down, I was no longer the same person. The woman who had kissed Marcus and Jamal was still alive inside me, and I didn't know how to reconcile her with the woman who had sworn eternal love to David. It's not just the guilt that torments me, it's also the paranoia. Every time David looks at me, I wonder if he can read something in my eyes. I can't get rid of the feeling that he knows something, but he never says anything. He's just the same as ever, still absorbed in his own daily business and still blind to the storm raging inside me. But Marcus and Jamal are different. They don't belong in my calm, predictable life. They don't fit into the neat box I've created for myself. They're the chaos I've invited into my world, and the storm feels stronger with every encounter. I think about them all the time. Marcus's laugh, his easy confidence, Jamal's focus, the way he looks at me with those sharp eyes, making me feel like I'm the only one who matters. The thought of them both in the same room is overwhelming, but I can't stop thinking about it. I want them both, that I find myself sinking deeper and deeper into a web of lies. I go to the gym and pretend that everything is normal, and I smile at David when he asks me how my day was. But the truth is, I'm living two very different lives, and neither one of them is really me. The worst part wasn't the guilt, but the way I started to see David. I could hardly look at him without feeling a wave of shame. He wasn't the problem. He hadn't done anything wrong, but I had made him into something I wasn't passionate about. And now, With Marcus and Jamal, I lived in a world that felt more alive and vibrant. But I knew it was also a dangerous world. One evening, as I sat on the sofa chatting with David, I felt like a stranger. He was watching TV, talking absently about his day at work, while all I could think about was the last time I was with Marcus and Jamal. David's voice interrupted my thoughts, and I turned around, surprised. I forced a smile. "Are you okay?" he asked, frowning with concern. "You've been distant lately," I stuttered. Had I been acting so obvious? "I'm fine," I said hastily, adding, "just tired, I think." David nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't pursue the matter, but I knew something had changed between us. We were drifting apart, and I was the one pushing him away. The guilt didn't go away with that. Not only had I lied to David, but I had lied to Marcus and Jamal as well. They didn't deserve this. They were confident, strong men, perfectly capable of finding someone without the complications of marriage. But I couldn't let go. I knew they didn't want a serious relationship. It wasn't love, it was lust. My lust for Marcus and Jamal that I couldn't resist. But the way they treated me made me feel valued for the first time in years. In their eyes, I was wanted, desired, powerful. And yet, even as I felt this, I couldn't shake the idea that I was taking advantage of them too. And that made everything feel even more wrong. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I ran into Jamal. I hadn't seen him or Marcus for a few days, and my stomach tightened at the sight of him. He smiled at me, that familiar smile, and I felt my pulse quicken. "Monica," he whispered, his voice low and steady, as if he knew exactly what effect he had on me. "It's good to see you." "You too," I replied, trying to sound casual, but failing. "I was thinking," Jamal began, his voice almost playful, "that maybe we could go out tonight. Just you and me. Marcus has something to do, but I'm free." I could feel my heart pounding, my thoughts clashing with the desires I had been repressing. "I don't know," I said, my voice quavering. "I'm not sure." He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing my hesitation. "Are you still worried about your husband?" I swallowed hard, a wave of guilt washing over me. "It's not that. I just—" Jamal came closer, his eyes meeting mine. "You know, Monica, you shouldn't just sit at home. You should go out and enjoy life. Don't let the guilt overwhelm you." I froze, transfixed by his gaze. Every warning, every hint of guilt vanished with those words. "Okay," I whispered, hardly finding my voice. "I'll go." That evening, I went to Jamal's apartment. As I stood outside his door, I felt the weight of my choice pressing down on me. What was I doing? What had I become? But when the door opened, Jamal's smile was like a drug. We wasted no time. He didn't want small talk, and neither did I. As we kissed, I could feel the powerful attraction between us, his hands pulling me closer, his touch full of demand. There was no going back now. The guilt was still there, but it felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else, not me. It was my choice, my decision. In that moment, with Jamal, I felt more alive than I had in years. As I drove home that night, my mind was a million miles away. I couldn't stop shaking. What had I done? How could I go on living a lie? David was waiting for me when I came in, his tired eyes lifting from his book as I entered. "You're home late," he said softly. "I had some things to do," I replied, my voice barely audible. He nodded as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual, but I felt it all the same. Overwhelmed, guilty about my actions, suffocating with every breath. I knew I couldn't go on living like this. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The days that followed were like a fog, thick and disorienting, every moment merging into the next without clear boundaries. The guilt that had been gnawing at me flared up like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate. I couldn't explain why I felt overwhelmed by my actions. And yet, I found myself unable to stop. The world I had built with my own hands and lived in secret with Marcus and Jamal was beginning to crumble, and I was already too deep in to get out. David was starting to notice. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the brief moments when our eyes met and he hesitated. He wasn't a fool, not really. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, to maintain the illusion of our perfect little life, but the cracks were starting to show. The house felt colder, the silence between us heavier. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table pretending to sort through bills, David walked in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at me with an inscrutable expression. "Monica," he said at last, his voice low, "we need to talk." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "Okay," I whispered, my voice quavering. I knew what was going to happen. I knew that after all I'd done, I couldn't keep pretending forever. David sits across from me, his eyes fixed on mine as he tries to read the thoughts I am desperately trying to hide. "You've been distant for weeks," he says, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I can feel it. Something's not right." I swallow hard, the guilt overwhelming and suffocating. How can I lie to him? How can I continue to play this game? "David," I say, but the words get stuck in my throat. He leans forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Is there someone else?" I freeze. His words hit me like a punch in the stomach. My chest tightens, and I take a sharp breath. I want to deny it, tell him everything is fine and that he is just being paranoid. But I can't. Not anymore. I don't know what to say. I whisper, tears welling up in my eyes. David's face fell. I could see that he was full of hurt and disbelief. He had always trusted me, always believed in us. I had broken that trust. I knew that. "I didn't want this," I continued, my voice barely audible. "I never wanted this to happen, but it did." His hands were clenched into fists, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He was trying to understand, to make sense of it all. "Who?" he asked, his voice low. "Who were you seeing?" I couldn't name them. It felt like betraying him and myself. I could only shake my head and remain silent. David sat back down, pale and with pain in his eyes. "I trusted you, Monica. I thought we were happy. I never meant to hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. "But I did. I can't take it back." I was in a daze for the next few hours. David didn't yell or cry. He was silent, cold, distant. He was like a switch that had been flipped off, trying to digest the damage I had caused. I couldn't blame him. What could he say to someone who had destroyed everything they had built together? That night, we didn't speak or touch. I lay next to him, heartbroken, knowing that whatever I had, was slipping away. With every breath, I could feel the distance growing between us. The next morning, things had changed. I woke up and David wasn't home. The half of the bed he had slept on hadn't been touched. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe he had gone to work early. Maybe we could just go on pretending for another day and everything would be fine. But when I found the note, reality hit me. It was simple, written in his familiar handwriting, and it stung like a knife. Monica, I can't do it anymore. I don't know what went wrong between us, but I can't go on living a lie. I need space and time to think. Please respect my wishes. David. My hands trembled as I read the letter again. The weight of his words was too much for me to bear. He was leaving. I knew it wasn't goodbye. Not yet, at least. But it felt like the beginning of the end. The days that followed seemed like years. David didn't return my calls or respond to my messages. I tried to tell myself that it was only a temporary separation and that he would come back, that maybe we could still make it work. But deep down, I knew things were much more than that. Marcus and Jamal both reached out to me during this time. They were worried and wanted to know what was going on. They sensed the change in me and the way I was distancing myself from them. But I couldn't talk to them about David. I couldn't explain the chaos that was consuming my life. Just when I thought I had this secret life under control, it all came crashing down. Marcus texted me first. What's wrong, Monica? I don't like the way things are between us. I wanted to respond, to explain, but I couldn't. I couldn't face him, especially as I knew I'd gone too far. Jamal tried to call, but I didn't answer. I couldn't face him, especially as I was falling apart. Guilt was suffocating me, and there was nothing I could do about it. A week later, David came home. He looked tired, his eyes dull, but the clarity in his gaze broke my heart all over again. Monica, he said softly, his voice steady but cold. I think we need to talk. I nodded, a sharp pain in my stomach. I know, he sighed, rubbing his temples. I've been thinking about everything between us. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't go on living like this. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. I'm going to go away, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know how long I'll be gone for, but I need to clear my head. I think you do too. My chest tightened, and I felt the ground beneath my feet disappear. David had always been my rock, my safe haven, but now I had driven him away. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears finally falling. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for this to happen. David didn't say anything more. He just stood up and walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. I sat there, numb. The consequences of my actions were now real to me. The life I had built with David, the life I had promised to cherish, was slipping through my fingers. I had ruined everything for a fleeting passion and now had nothing. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if there was any way to fix this, but I knew one thing. I had crossed a line. and the consequences would have to be mine to bear. Thank you for listening to my story. This is the place to share my story of infidelity. Thank you for subscribing.